The snow fell like silent judgment. It did not care that two girls were kneeling in it. It did not care that their skin, pale silver blue under the dying light, had never been built for cold like this. It did not care that their thin suits, the last fragments of a ship that no longer existed, barely covered enough to matter. The snow fell, and it buried the world in white, and somewhere behind a crumbling wooden cabin, an orange sun bled slowly into the horizon. Lyra and Vale had been on Earth for 11 days. They had not chosen to come here. Their vessel had been struck by debris in low orbit, a graveyard of dead satellites and forgotten human mistakes, and the emergency pod had carried them down like a falling star that no one wished upon. They had landed in a forest in winter, in a country whose language sounded like stones grinding together. They had walked for days. They had hidden from lights, from sounds, from the distant barking of dogs. They were not dangerous. They were not invaders. They were simply lost. Lyra was the older of the two by 3 planetary cycles, enough to make her the one who made decisions, the one who bore the weight of every wrong turn. Her hair was the color of starlight caught in ice, and her eyes were the deep, unsettling green of a nebula seen from far away. She had tattoos along her arms, not decorative but functional, the kind her people used to mark rank, loss, and survival. She had many marks for loss now. Vale was smaller, quieter. She had the same silver hair, the same impossible eyes, but where Lyra wore her fear as something sharp and defensive, Vale wore hers like a bruise, soft, deep, and slow to heal. She had not spoken more than 30 words since the crash. She communicated through her hands, through the way she pressed close to Lyra when danger felt near, through the occasional sound she made that was not quite a word in any language. They had found the abandoned farm 2 days ago and had been sheltering behind it, eating nothing, drinking melted snow, waiting for a plan that never came. That was when Marcus found them. Marcus Hale was 51 years old, a veteran of 2 deployments, 1 failed marriage, and a decade of farming land that barely wanted to be farmed. He lived alone. He liked it that way mostly. He walked his property every evening at sunset, a habit left over from the military, a need to know the perimeter of his world before dark swallowed it. He had not expected to find them. He stopped at the corner of the old log barn and stared. 2 girls, women really, kneeling in the snow, holding each other, covered in frost and something that was clearly not any fabric he had ever seen. Their skin was the wrong color. Their eyes, when they turned to look at him, were the wrong color too. They did not run. They were too tired to run. They simply looked at him with a calm, hollow expression of beings who had already accepted the worst and were simply waiting for it to arrive. Marcus had seen that expression before. He had worn it himself once, in a place far from here. He stood very still for a long moment. Every rational thought he had told him to back away. Call someone. Report it. Let the government or the military or whoever handled these things take over. He was one man with a farmhouse and a wood stove and a dog named Bucket who was afraid of butterflies. But the rational thoughts were quiet tonight. What was loud was the memory of being 23, alone in a foreign country, wounded and cold, and a stranger, a farmer actually, not unlike himself, who had pulled him into a warm room and asked nothing except that he survive. Marcus cleared his throat. "You two need to come inside," he said. They did not understand the words, but they understood the tone. And they understood when he stepped back and gestured toward the lit window of his house, warm and orange against the dark blue of the coming night. Lyra looked at Vale. Vale looked at Lyra. 1,000 calculations happened in the space of a breath. They stood up and followed him. Inside, Marcus moved with quiet efficiency. He did not ask questions, partly because he suspected he would not get answers he understood, and partly because questions could wait. He stoked the fire until it was roaring. He found 2 thick wool blankets from the chest in the hallway. He heated soup, plain, simple, nothing complicated, and set 2 bowls on the table. Bucket sniffed both visitors, sneezed enormously, and then lay down at Vale's feet as if he had always been her dog. Vale looked down at him. Something moved in her face. Something cracked open carefully, like a door long sealed against weather. She reached down and touched his fur. Lyra watched Marcus from across the room. She was still calculating, still measuring threat. It was what she did. It was how she had kept them both alive. Marcus met her eyes and held up both hands, open, palms forward. It was a gesture that needed no translation. Lyra looked at his hands for a long time. Then she looked at the fire. Then she looked at Vale, who was quietly crying into the fur of a ridiculous dog named Bucket. She sat down at the table. She picked up the spoon. In the days that followed, a strange and careful language grew between the 3 of them, built from gesture, from repeated sounds, from drawings scratched on paper, from the patient willingness of all parties to be misunderstood and try again. Marcus learned that Lyra's name sounded like a question when spoken correctly. Lyra learned that Marcus laughed when something surprised him, which surprised her every time. Vale began to speak again, first in her own language, then in fragments of his, then in a mixture of both that was entirely their own. Marcus drove into town and bought clothing. He did not explain who it was for. He returned with coats, boots, thick sweaters, and, at the last minute, 2 small star-shaped pins from a craft store, because he did not know why, only that it felt right. He set them on the table without ceremony. Lyra picked one up and studied it for a long time. Then she looked at him with those impossible green eyes and said, very carefully, in a word she had learned the night before, "Home." Marcus looked around his farmhouse. The scarred table, the old dog, the fire, the snow pressing soft and white against every window. "Yeah," he said. "Home." Outside the snow kept falling, but inside it was warm.